Welcome to Unit 2 of Lesson 7. Success is not final and failure is not fatal. I previously shared with you that I'd started my own business shortly after another firm acquired the company that I was working for in 2008. And after launching the business, I worked as a consultant for about 6 months while I developed my business plan, strategized, and went to market. And my 3-year plan went something like this. Handle files on my own for the first year and work from home. Then moderate growth and add 2 to 3 people in the following year and maybe get an office. And then in year 3, I was hoping to have 5 people and generate revenues of about $800,000. So that was kind of my 3-year plan, what it looked like. As I approached key clients in the first 6 months, it really became evident that there was a much higher need for my service, this type of work that I was doing, than I had originally anticipated. I was being asked to take on hundreds of files within a short period of time. So I hired up immediately to accommodate all of the requests. I moved to an executive office center space with a core group of about 6 people by the end of year 1. And at the time, a friend of mine who I had previously worked with had bought me a money tree to celebrate the business and the new office and, the 6 people. So it's, now the money tree, you have to understand, I've never been good with plants. So anything green in my house is really either a jar of pickles in the fridge or one of those, fake trees or plants. So the kids laugh at me every time. I would always, buy fresh herbs to grow in my house, and they would always die. I don't have that green thumb. But this was a money tree. So I was determined to nurture it, love it, and really see it flourish. And it's important to the story for reasons you'll understand in a little bit. It was really symbolic to me. So business continued to grow, literally beyond my expectations, to the point at our peak, just 2.5 years after launching, we were a $4 million company with 32 employees, and the money tree was flourishing. But shortly prior to hitting our peak, the government announced some legislative changes that were going to really drastically affect the viability of the business. So the claims that we specialized in were really going to be significantly reduced based on these new policy changes, which meant that the insurance companies would no longer need to outsource, and I was an outsource provider. So I was really going to have to rethink strategy and look at diversifying to keep the business alive, because the core of our business was really no longer going to be needed by the industry. So we saw a steady decline in revenue over the next 3 years. And as the revenues decreased, so did the staff, obviously. And as people resigned to take on work in a more stable insurer environment, they would be in tears as they left because they didn't want to leave the team that we had built. We really, truly had become a family. Now, I have a very strong internal locus of control, and I am a firm believer that we are makers of our own destiny, that everything happens for a reason, and that positive thinking leads to positive results. So with that in mind, I tried so many things to turn the business around. I did market research. I developed new offerings. I continued to invest money into the business as we continued to lose money month over month and year over year. I was tied to some expensive leases that I couldn't get out of and assessed with a significant tax debt. At the same time, the money tree was dying. It became infested with bugs and it lost all of that beautiful green luster. And I became consumed with keeping this plant alive, somehow believing that the success of the business was contingent upon the health of the money tree. But nothing worked. The business was still struggling. The plant was still dying. And, although we experienced some great success in the 8 years that I owned that business, I made lots of mistakes as well. I'd ridden that entrepreneurial roller coaster of life, from the financial struggles associated with starting a business with my own capital, straight up to success, and then back down to failure. I learned so many lessons, but I'd have to say, the lesson of the money tree is the one that really resonates most with me. I spent so much time, effort, and energy trying to bring that tree and by association, the business back to life. And it wasn't until I realized it's okay to let go. And I physically picked up that tree and I took it to the trash. Emotionally accepting the fact that success is not final and failure is not fatal. As soon as I did that and physically released the tree and emotionally accepted that, is the point where I could truly move forward and venture on to the next chapter of my life. I was able to release. In John Maxwell's book, Failing Forward, he tells us that all roads to achievement lead through the land of failure. And if we have not failed, we have not learned. So just because we failed at something doesn't make us a failure. Maxwell shares 7 abilities of achievers that really enable them to fail, not take it personally, and keep moving forward. So those things are, he says, number 1, reject rejection. So never accept rejection, reject rejection. Number 2, see failure as temporary, because that's exactly what it is. You will move on. Number 3, see failures as isolated incidents. This is where that helps us not create a story around us being a failure. Rather, we failed at something and move on. So it's an isolated incident. Number 4, keep realistic expectations. Recognize that you will fail. You're not always going to succeed at every single thing you do. Number 5, focus on your strengths. So when you're assessing or reflecting on the failure, what did you do really well, and focus on that part of it. Number 6, vary your approach to achievement. So if there is something that is all about what are the lessons learned, right? So next time, what would you do differently? And number 7, bounce back. And I think number 7 is the most important. We have to have the strength and the willingness to bounce back and not get consumed by the failure. So by acknowledging steps 1 through 6 and really taking time to reflect and learn from our failures, we bounce back stronger and wiser than ever before. Reflection is something I've really folded into my life over the past 10 years or so, and I continue to work on my consistency with it daily. It's not a one and done. It's important for so many reasons. It really helps us learn more about ourselves. It helps us process our emotions, which we spent a ton of time talking about in the last lesson. It helps us appreciate the good in our lives and be grateful, as well as strategize on how to change the things that are not so grateful that are not so good in our lives. And if nothing else, it really provides us the space to be selfish, to not worry about others or expend energy on anyone else. Reflection gives us time with ourselves. Whether it's minutes or hours or days, it really benefits us on all 3 planes: physically, mentally, and spiritually. And the level of reflection is really irrelevant. It can range from one extreme to another. It could be, from taking a full week retreat to reflect on your life and goals, to very light reflections that consist of a minute or 2 following a conversation with someone or a recent experience. Reflection can be intense, it can be relaxed, or you can make it fun. Reflection is whatever you choose to make it. Earlier, I had mentioned that I'd gone to Paraguay on a leadership training initiative. And what I haven't shared with you yet is my journey getting there. So from Toronto, it was a 3-flight adventure. My itinerary was Toronto to Punta Cana to Panama, and then Panama to Asunción, which is the capital of Paraguay. Now, the first flight was uneventful to Punta Cana. And when I arrived in Panama, I headed up to the Copa Lounge for some food and a drink. I thought my flight out of Panama to Paraguay left at 11:15 p.m. that evening. So I headed down to the gate around 9:30 p.m. to see if I could find any of my John Maxwell team members, my JMT colleagues. And there were tons of people at the gate. It surfaced 3 different flights. So there were all sorts of people. And I saw a flight to Paraguay on the board and assumed it was mine. So as some time passed, I looked again and the flight on the board was gone. And this was around 11 p.m. So of course I started to panic. And I managed to find an attendant that spoke a tiny bit of English because everybody spoke Spanish, which I did not. And he tried to explain to me that my flight had actually left much earlier in the evening. In fact, it left at 9:15 p.m., not 11:15 p.m. So I'd managed to miss the flight altogether. And there wasn't another flight leaving for Paraguay until the next morning. So by the time I sorted through all of this, it was well after midnight. And I had to be at the Copa counter at 6 a.m. to try and get myself on the next flight out. So there was no point in going to a hotel. So I slept in the airport. Now, not sure if you've ever been stranded in an airport of a third world country, but it's certainly no Ritz-Carlton or even a Motel 6 for that matter. There were a few bench-style chairs with arms that didn't fold, so you couldn't lay down. It was eerily deserted, so I could, only do my best really in the environment that I was in, and I did make it through the night. So at 6 a.m., I was the second person in line at the Copa counter waiting for them to open. And as it turned out, they couldn't get me on another flight until 9:15 p.m. that evening. So guess what? I had to spend a whole new day in the Panama airport. So I could either laugh or cry. Well, actually, I did both. I did spend some time crying, but then I spent some time writing and reflecting. And I kept this reflection super light and comical. Otherwise, I probably would have been ready to hop on the next flight back home. I was already out of my comfort zone, traveling on my own to this third world country with no one that I knew. So, I wrote this reflection, and I still look at it from time to time because it really reminded me of this opportunity of a lifetime. And being stranded in Panama was part of that whole experience, and it was a phenomenal overall experience. So I call this one Tales from the Kip, and it's the top 10 things I learned after being stranded in an airport for over 24 hours. So I'll share it with you. So what I learned through this experience about myself. Number one, I need to brush up on my Spanish. Number two, I cannot sleep sitting up no matter how tired I am. Number three, Copa Lounge has 2 shift changes throughout the day, and they have surprisingly good wine. Number 4, I like the taco salad at Margaritaville. Coconut shrimp, not so much. Number 5, my butt is not meant to be sat on for as long as it has been. Number 6, it takes me 3 times as long to write an article when tired. Number 7, my eyes are swollen, but I can still see. Number 8, I am super sensitive to the sound of children's screams or to anyone's sounds for that matter. Number 9, there's 3 Lacoste stores in this airport for some strange reason. And number 10, you can get a free plane ticket if you cry long enough. Did I mention that Copa Airlines actually felt so bad for me that they didn't even charge me for my new ticket? So although, the reflection is a little bit comical, it was something that really helped me through that time because I thought, what have I learned about myself and what have I learned over these last 24 hours? Although the next part that I'm about to share with you really has nothing to do with reflection, I feel compelled to share it here because it's how I met the beautiful Louise Elliott, whose story I shared with you much earlier on in an earlier lesson. So as it turns out, there were a number of JMTers who were stranded in Panama due to delayed flights and missed connections. The difference was they were in hotels for the most part because their missed flights were due to the airline delays, not due to stupidity like mine. So JMT coaches have a private Facebook group. And there were a number of us who were posting to the group page as we traveled from all over the world to come together in Paraguay. So Louise, who I didn't know at the time, posted to the page that she was stranded in Panama. So I responded to her to let her know that, hey, I too was stranded at the Panama airport and suggested we meet for lunch at Margaritaville, which, by the way, was the only restaurant in the airport. So we met and immediately hit it off. And we had such a great time together in Paraguay and continued to maintain a relationship, even though she lives in Ohio and I in Toronto. So you see, it wasn't all for naught. Had I not been stranded in that airport, Louise and I never would have developed the bond that we did. And chances are we wouldn't have even met in Paraguay because all of the coaches, as I explained, were dispersed to all different places all of the time. So, so again, that's the universe working in creative and beautiful ways. So that's it for Unit 2 of Lesson 7. And hopefully these stories will help you look at failure and reflection in a different light. In the next video, we'll talk about venturing outside of our comfort zone. Can't wait to see you there.